recording this today, so just so you know, don't say anything dumb. We'll go ahead and do the intro, and then we'll get into our talk with Stephanie. So, welcome back. For those who could make it in person, it's great. We're kind of doing the hybrid thing where we're doing both the in-person and the virtual options, and we'll continue to do that. We've got one more presentation for this year, and then we'll break for the summer. It's not going yet.
Can everyone see the presentation that's up there right now?
Mary, I was able to see it on my end. I'm not sure about others on the line, but I'm guessing that I see Joseph, yes.
Okay.
The forward's not working, but you can forward the slides for me. If it'll go.
I'm trying.
There we go. So our next function is on the Green Stormwater Infrastructure Fund, and Blue Baldwin with Chief on Water is going to be here to give the presentation, and our sponsors for that are Ellery and Thornton Resources. So that'll be on April 7th, which is right before the AZ Water Conference. So I know a lot of folks are going to plan on going to that too, but we are going to be having a luncheon before that. So Pima County policy does require that you wear your mask except when you're not eating or drinking. And we're going to continue to do our pre-ordered box lunches for now. And we can't take any outdoor registrations. So be sure to register online. You'll see reminders for that coming out through the AZ Water ads themselves. They're not individual emails, so make sure you scroll down to take a look at that, or just visit the website, and all of our events should be posted there too. So for our sponsors today, we've got Montgomery Associates. Thank you. Montgomery Associates is an Arizona-based water resources consulting firm specializing in groundwater development and management. Founded in Tucson nearly 40 years ago, M&A's professional hydrogeologists and groundwater modelers provide an array of groundwater resource development services for municipal, industrial, tribal, and environmental clients. They're not engineers, but like to work with them. Contact Juliet McKenna to learn more. You guys have anything else you want to add?
No, thank you.
Thank you for sponsoring. And secondly, we've got KENG, John and Luke. Thank you guys. KENG Construction Inc. is a 100% employee-owned licensed heavy civil and infrastructure construction company, including 6 divisions representing 300 employees in Arizona. Thank you guys. Got anything to add? All right, we appreciate it. We couldn't do these without you guys. So, our speaker today is Stephanie Hayes-Scheid. She's a senior water policy advisor with the Association of State Drinking Water Administrators, located in Washington, D.C. So ASDWA's members are the Drinking Water Program Administrators in the 50 states, the 5 territories, and the Navajo Nation, and the District of Columbia. Prior to coming to ASDWA, Stephanie worked for more than 4 years at the Association of Metropolitan Water Agencies, which represents large public drinking water systems, as the Director of Regulatory and Scientific Affairs. And she's going to be today presenting on the infrastructure bill and how that's going to affect all of us, hopefully in positive ways as water professionals. There are PDHs available. If you need one, contact Mary or me or Alejandra, and we can make sure that you get one. We don't have them available right now. But Stephanie, thank you. We're excited to have you.
Thank you all so much for having me. I'm just going to share my screen really quick. So let me get the slideshow up. Are you all able to see that? Good.
Yes, we are.
Okay, perfect. Okay. So yeah, as was mentioned, I'm here to talk to you today about the bipartisan infrastructure bill and what that means for the drinking water sector. Thank you so much for the introduction. You basically went over ASWA, but we represent all the drinking water program administrators through the 50 states, territories, Navajo Nation, and DC. So those are the individuals who provide public water system oversight with the regulation, technical assistance, and funding through set-asides and the SRFs and the BIL money that we'll be seeing. So here's a breakdown of what we'll be talking about today. We're going to do first a high-level breakdown of the BIL, a quick background on the state revolving funds in case y'all aren't too into the weeds on that, because so much of this money is going through the SRFs. I thought it was important to give a little bit of insight there. We'll break down some of the main funding components that impact the drinking water sector and a bit on the wastewater side as well. And then I'll dig into a couple of the non-funding requirements that are within the bill. And then finally, what does this mean for the sector as a whole? So really quick, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, or bill, is $550 billion in new federal investment. So that's across all sectors. There's $50 billion that is specific for water. But the Biden administration intended it to enhance the U.S. competitiveness, create jobs, and to grow a more sustainable, resilient, and just economy. And because there's a lot of confusion, the bill went through multiple name iterations. So many of you might know it as the Infrastructure Investments and Jobs Act. That's what it was before it passed. So the IIJA is the BIL. So from here on out, I'll be talking about the bill. One important thing to note is that we still are waiting on implementation memo from EPA for the water components. So that should hopefully be out any day. I'm hoping next week possibly. But for those of you who maybe have gotten into the extreme weeds of the bill, this won't have any new cutting edge information on that side as we're still waiting. But for those of you who maybe just been on the outskirts of it, I hope this will give you a good breakdown of it. And then also hopefully for everyone, I'm able to provide some insights that you can take away from this for the water sector. So here's all the major BIL programs. All the funding is from 2022 to 2026, so 5 years. This is the ones that I'm going to be, these first three are the main ones I'm going to be covering. I'll go a little bit into the other ones, but the PFAS one, I do want to say there actually are 3 separate pots of money for PFAS, so I'll be going through those as well. But the top 3 ones are the really big ones that we'll be talking about and digging into the infrastructure law. So really quick with the SRFs, it's a very big program, and a large portion of the BIL funds will be going through the SRFs. And so some of the basics as they were before the bill, much of this is still the same for all the funds going through, though there's some matching requirements that are different and allotments are far greater. So EPA funds the SRFs each year and states provide a 20% match. And these are loans with terms of up to 30 years or 40 years for disadvantaged communities or for the life of the project, whichever is greater. And public or privately owned clean water systems or nonprofit community water systems are eligible. And it's a very large scope of different projects: drinking water treatment, pipe installation replacement, source water protection, all sorts of things. So there's also the clean water SRFs, which is the wastewater side. I'll be showing some components of the bill that fall in there, but I don't work within that space, so I'm not going to go into huge detail. If you have questions, I can try and find that for you later and follow up. But the program is very similar, with eligible projects being related to wastewater, construction of wastewater and stormwater treatment facilities, collection systems, non-point source issues, so all within that space. So every state does do their SRF a little bit differently. So you can't really get in. Arizona's is going to be different than Utah's. So you have to kind of go to your state agencies. But essentially, for the most part, what happens is a state will conduct a needs survey. The allocation of funding from the federal government is based on that survey. And then states create a priority list that then morphs into an intended use plan, or IUP. You might have heard that. And that's how they allocate these funds. So let me go to the next slide. So this is the breakdown of the clean water SRF and the drinking water SRF fund appropriations under the bill. So this is beyond what happens normally each year. So as you can see here, we have, you know, for the most part, it's fairly similar each year, but there are a little bit of differences in the amount. And then the state match changes. So in the first 2 years, only 10%, and then for the next 3 years, 20%. When you see this mandated additional subsidy, what that means is those funds have to be either grants or 100% principal forgiveness loans. So literally, it just means it's a loan, but you forgive the entirety of the loan. States opt for one or the other depending on their needs. A lot of times, one of them will require less paperwork. Typically, the principal forgiveness requires less paperwork. So this is beyond a 0% loan. So that means that basically at the end, it'll have been a grant essentially, but they do have different terminologies. But when you see the mandated additional subsidy, that's what it's talking about. So this is kind of the breakdown of the major components that I'm going to talk about today. The lead service line replacement, the 3 different breakdowns of the emerging contaminants funding, some of the water and groundwater storage, and the Indian Health Service, as that's also another large component of this. So first with the SRF lead service line replacement. So with this, we've been given $15 billion, $3 billion a year for each of the years. And there's no state match for this one, so that's a little bit different. And again, we have that 49% additional subsidy for these funds. So the recipients, just like a normal SRF, their states receive the funding and then they provide those funds directly to the water utilities. And the tribes and territories are also eligible. So same as the normal, they provide low interest loans, principal forgiveness, and or grants to replace lead service lines. And we'll get into a little bit of this later, but this has a lot of intricacies with the lead copper rule that's been moving through. So I'll talk about that at the end, and you all may have questions on that as well. But that's what we're looking at for the lead service lines. The WIN, this is one of the ones that's actually not a part of the SRF funds under the bill. So this is the water infrastructure and, oh man, I always have it, but now we just call it the WIN. But it's a different pot of money. The WIN Act passed a couple years ago. This is $5 billion for underserved communities, and so they talk about both disadvantaged communities and small communities. So disadvantaged communities is defined in the Safe Drinking Water Act as basically up to the states to define it. So all the states have a different definition for what they consider a disadvantaged community. And then small community is one that has a population of 10,000 or fewer individuals and that lacks the capacity to incur debt sufficient to finance these projects. Oh, I should say, yeah. So what the actual eligible activities are for is they're mostly for PFAS. So it's emerging contaminants as a whole, but it's primarily targeted at PFAS, and it includes water filtration systems. So this is, again, emerging contaminants, but this time this is under the SRF program. So this is an additional $4 billion with, again, no state match needed. Same as the others. States receive the funding, goes to the utilities, tribes and territories eligible. And again, the exact same with the principal forgiveness, grants, and loans. So with this one, under the BIL language, PFAS is identified, but also any pollutant identified by the EPA's administrator as a contaminant of emerging concern. This is one of those that we do have to wait for this implementation memo from EPA as to what exactly might qualify under that. There's a lot of talk about the contaminant candidate list. We just had the 5th one that's moving through EPA right now, and it has quite a list of them, including all PFAS. So that's looking like it might be where it goes, but we won't know until we get that memo. I know a lot of the different states have manganese and some other issues, so hopefully, you know, this will have a fairly wide scope for states to help utilities out. And next, this one is the water and groundwater storage and conveyance. So a smaller amount here. The recipients themselves are states and local municipalities, and the eligible activities: water storage, groundwater storage, conveyance. Basically, the project must be found feasible and benefits proportionate to federal investment, so pretty broad. The small water storage and groundwater storage projects are defined under the BIL as projects that have storage capacities between 2,000 acre-feet and 30,000 acre-feet. So again, all for storage or conveying directly or indirectly from surface water to groundwater storage. So last of the bigger projects or bigger components I want to talk about is the Indian Health Service Sanitation Facilities Construction Program. So $3.5 billion, which is hopefully going to cover quite a significant portion of the Indian Health Service's identified needs. The recipients will be federally recognized tribal governments, and eligible activities are Indian homes with services such as water wells, on-site wastewater disposal systems, or connections to community water supply and wastewater disposal systems. So this one is another one. The IHS, Indian Health Service, is still waiting on some implementation guidance. So we have to wait and see exactly how these funds are going to go out. So now I want to move on to, although I said I'm not in the wastewater space, I do at least keep track of it. So these are the two big ones that I'm watching for wastewater in the bipartisan infrastructure law. And that's two, so emerging contaminants and water recycling. So this is the third pot of money under the bill for emerging contaminants. This one is $1 billion, and again, no state match. And it's pretty much exactly the same as the other SRFs provided to the states and then go through to the water systems. This is all the clean water infrastructure projects. So there's all sorts of different projects that could fall under green infrastructure and things, but basically any type of wastewater project that could be addressing emerging contaminants, again, including PFAS or something that's identified by EPA's administrator. So for this one, it's $100,000 the first year and then $225,000 every year after. And then the next one is the water recycling portion, $1 billion. This is open to everyone, basically, so it doesn't have to go through the states, this particular one. Eligible activities, it's quite a large list, but here it's water recycling and reuse projects and large water reuse projects and reclamation sites. So if you go in the actual language, it's quite extensive. It's reclaim and reuse municipal, industrial, domestic, agriculture, wastewater. It's a whole lot if you want to get into that, but so let's see. Next, okay, so these are just a small amount of what else is related to water in the BIL. So we do have some rural water projects. There's a few that were already identified prior that are specifically listed in the rural water portion. We have the Indian water rights settlements, water smart grants. There's a whole section on water desalination projects. Some for watershed management, the UIC grants, WRDA, the Water Resources Development Act, data acquisition. You might have heard that previously with some congressional movement. And then there's an onslaught of locational and geographic specific projects. So if you go in there, I think there's one in Utah. There's quite a few out west that are specifically earmarked those funds for just that project. So now I want to dig into the non-funding components. So these are items of the BIL that have been mandated to do, but don't necessarily have funds for the water utilities that we'll be having to manage. So the first part is the cybersecurity support. So this goes into two sections. So first, the water system risk assessment, and then the technical support. For the risk assessment, EPA and CISA have to identify water systems that, if degraded or rendered inoperable due to a cybersecurity incident, would lead to a significant impact on public health and safety. So that breaks down in the bill to, they look at basically whether cybersecurity vulnerabilities for a public water system have been identified, if that water system has the capacity to deal with a cybersecurity incident without federal support, and then also whether a public water system, if it were degraded or not rendered inoperable, would cause a cascading failure of other critical infrastructure. And then with this technical support, it's two components. So they need to establish a methodology for identifying these water systems that should get federal support for cybersecurity. And then also they have to establish a timeline of the bill for making voluntary technical support for cybersecurity available to specific public water systems. And now another part that's gotten significant airplay, as I'm sure many of you have seen, is BABA. So it's the Build American, Buy American. One important thing to note is that the Buy American Act has been around for quite a while. It was established in 1933, but the BIL amended certain aspects of it, and then we kind of modified it into this BABA. This is all relevant to taxpayer-financed federal assistance money. So basically, if you're receiving federal funding, as you do through the SRF and the BIL funds, you must use steel and iron products as well as manufactured products and construction materials that are produced in the U.S. So that term produced in the U.S. is very specific. It means that it was manufactured in the U.S. and the cost of its components that are mined, produced, or manufactured in the U.S. have to be greater than 55% of the total cost. Now, we do have a capability for a waiver under the BIL and BABA. So to get a waiver, you have to show that whatever you need, steel, construction materials, or whatnot, are not produced in the U.S. in a sufficient amount or reasonably available quantities or to a satisfactory quality. The other side is that you can prove that the use of iron, steel, or manufactured products in the U.S. would increase the cost of the total overall project by more than 25%. With the waivers component, I'll talk a little bit more about that. And when we talk about impacts, there's still some unknown there because we are, again, still waiting on that implementation guidance from the federal government. So now I want to get into what this means for the sector, and I'm hoping you'll all have questions. If I can't answer them, I'll be happy to follow up and get some more information for you. But this has a lot of interesting interplays with the ongoing regulations that we have and with what we've done in the past. So with the state, there's quite a bit of unknowns and concerns. The first one is, so we have the lead copper rule that we're all aware of. The revisions were finalized last year, but the Biden administration decided to make some changes. One of those being that they're going to now do what's called the lead and copper rule improvements, or the LCRI. With that, they've identified that lead service line replacement requirements under the LCR may be changing. What we don't know with the BIL funds, we know that these monies must be used for lead service line activities. So that can be inventories and that can be replacements, but we don't have any information yet on any type of ratio, how much you can have go to inventories versus replacements. We also don't know yet how much money will be going to each state, how we'll allocate that. As we know, the Northeast and other parts of the Midwest have much more lead service lines than, say, the West Coast. So we're still waiting to see how that kind of falls out, but there's a lot of concern about utilities. Many of them are just now possibly getting going with these inventories. So, how much replacement will be able to do if we're still waiting to figure out where these lines are. So that's one portion of it. Currently, there's also a lot of difficulty communicating about what this all means to the public. The Biden administration, has been touting this. It's a massive achievement. It's the largest amount of funds to go to our infrastructure in our history. It's the largest amount of money to go into our water systems at one time in our history. So there's a lot of really good airplay about this, but the public sees it as, this money is here now. Why can't we access it? Why can't I get my project out the door and get it funded tomorrow? So there's been a lot of difficulty trying to communicate that, yes, this has passed and it is there, but we're still waiting essentially on the mechanisms to get this money through. And even once it's through, you have to apply. You have to go through the normal kind of timeline to get a project approved and paid for. Another part of that is that a lot of, and I'll go into this a little bit more later when we talk about Justice 40, but a lot of smaller utilities and smaller cities have trouble applying for SRFs. So, we're kind of waiting to see how this might be streamlined with the BIL funds, but we just don't know yet. And there's also concerns with meeting this additional state match. So it's great that we're getting the monies, but the states still have to come up with that 10 or 20% for not the PFAS and lead components, but for the other components, they have to come up with a 10 or 20% state match. And that's on top of what they've already been doing. So there is some concern with having to go to their state legislatures, figure out where to get that money from. And there's also significant staffing concerns with the states. So we get all this money and it's increasing the workload dramatically because, okay, so we have 3-4 times the amount of SRF funds that we normally do. That means you have 3 to 4 times the amount of applications to get this money through. And with many of the states, still the same amount of staff. So now some of them are looking at staffing up and getting quite a few more staff within their agencies, but some of them it's easier than others. Some of them have some constraints that make it difficult to get people in place. On top of it, because of the BIL funds being this huge, massive surge of money into the economy, your consulting firms and things are also staffing up very fast. So we're talking about kind of a huge hiring spree for engineers and other individuals to get these funds out the door. So there's some significant staffing concerns. And again, as I said multiple times, we're still waiting on the guidance. Hopefully that will be out any day now, but really until then, a lot of states are kind of in a holding pattern. Some are looking to move forward with kind of how they do things under the SRF in general, but a lot of them are waiting to see kind of how this might be different from what normally happens. So what about the water sector and the water systems themselves? So there's significant concerns with the BABA requirements and the ability to obtain waivers. It's another one, again, we're waiting on guidance to see what you have to do to get this waiver. But there's concerns that if there's a certain, item or there's been some talk with like different specific items that maybe are not manufactured in the US. If that's across the board, does every single utility have to go through with the red tape and fill out, whatever waiver forms there are and materials, and then, wait for this process to shove all of this paperwork through, whatever federal setup they have to give you these waivers. So we don't know what that looks like yet. So there's a lot of concern with how that might fall out. Another part that we're waiting on guidance is the technical assistant hubs. So that's including the BIL. It's the EPA has said that they're going to be setting up regional technical assistance hubs. We have like RCAP and National Rural Water. I'm sure you all work with them quite a bit. Yeah, I know they've been in talks with them, but they're still kind of figuring out how this will look. And then, of course, the small system challenges, as I said earlier, with accessing the SRFs. Currently, the SRF funds only reach about 7% of rural water systems. And a lot of them, it's just a capacity issue of maybe, not knowing how to apply for an SRF, not understanding what's all involved. So that's another component of this, is trying to figure out, how do we get these funds to those small systems. And now another component that I wanted to talk about is Justice 40. I'm sure you've all heard Justice 40. It's been a huge initiative of the White House. So it's a whole of government effort to ensure that at least 40% of the overall benefits from federal investments go to disadvantaged communities. Now, we spoke about before, disadvantaged communities does not have one national definition. It changes from state to state. But currently, the drinking water focus of J40 has been very heavy on the SRF since we're getting so much money under the BIL. So currently now another one, we're waiting to hear from EPA kind of what those parameters might be for what can be considered a benefit under Justice 40, and also what is kind of considered a disadvantaged community other than just relying on the state's definitions themselves, which may be just where it falls, is that however the states define it and report it is how they do. But we're waiting on that still. So unfortunately, what now is that we're waiting. I was kind of hoping, since we got this moved back, that maybe by the time I spoke to you all, we'd have a little bit more information, but it's looking like we'll probably end up getting it a couple days after I got to talk with you all. So unfortunately, I can't give any more insights yet. There's a lot of things that we're hoping to see out of the guidance, but we won't know till we see it. So that I did leave. So hopefully I can send this as a PDF to Mary. Hopefully we can get this out, because there is some good resources out there. Of course, you can read the bipartisan infrastructure law text if you feel so inclined. I did a lot of Control F to find the things that I needed. But the White House did put out a bipartisan infrastructure law guidebook that is extremely useful. There's a whole section on just the water components, and they do break it down into a really nice, like, here's the pot of money, here's what it all means, here's where it goes. That's pretty good. And then also the Council of Infrastructure Financing Authorities, or CIFA. We work really closely with them. They have some really great resources on their site. And of course, the American Water Works Association also has some really good information. So, and then as well, we just have a lot of good information on the SRF programs themselves if you're interested. So I'll make sure to hopefully get this all out to you all. And that has some really good links directly to, in case you want to dig into this anymore. But otherwise, thank you all again for letting me speak to you. I'm really excited to possibly take some questions. If, you know, there's not a whole lot of BIO questions, you also have me for a half hour. I pretty much do it all, PFAS, lead, MDBPs. So I'm happy just to kind of talk about whatever for the next half hour.
Thanks, Stephanie.
So anyone that's online have questions? Please feel free to unmute and ask.
Do you know if 1,4-dioxane is on that list of potential emerging contaminants?
So the list doesn't have anything other than PFAS specifically called out yet. I would guess that 1,4-dioxane will fall within that because it's identified by multiple states as some of them already have MCLs, New York does. So I would assume that 1,4-dioxane will fall under that. Kind of same with manganese is another one that I expect to. But I mean, the language says up to the administrator, so they could do whatever they want. And it'll qualify. The CCL5, I think, will just be an easier way to say, hey, just get out the gate. Here's a bunch of stuff that can count. So that's what I expect to see, but don't know yet.
Anyone?
What do you know about how this is allocated to states? Because, you know, really what we're wondering here in Arizona is how much money will we have and how is our state agency going to handle it? And you touched on those issues, but can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so it kind of comes down to with the normal SRFs, like I said, they have that needs assessment that they go do. Now, states don't have to necessarily do the needs assessment. Some states, we call them the 1% states. They're the ones, and I'd have to look up, I apologize, I have to look up Arizona specifically, but some of the states don't necessarily do those needs assessments and just get put in that 1% category where that's their allocation of the SRF funds. But every year, to my understanding, every year EPA puts out an allocation like table of this is how much each state gets. I assume that we'll get the same for the BIL. I don't know if they'll use the same formula across the board for every pot of money, if it'll be different for like the lead and the PFAS, and they'll try and make it region specific based on who needs it more. I could get you the link to the actual like table for 2022's. I think we have that, or maybe it's 2021's table for how it was all allocated. But that's one where it's based on the needs assessment previously. Probably be that way again, maybe. I don't know, unfortunately, but that will hopefully be in this guidance, will be a breakdown.
So it's up to this, as a follow-up question then, the state agencies so the individual entities need to submit to the state agencies submit to EPA, and then EPA makes funds available based on the list they have. So it really starts from...
Say it again, I'm sorry, say the last part.
So it starts from the bottom, that the entity needs to express a need to have a chance to get that money, basically.
Yeah, so, and I will caveat this again, with the SRF programs are different in every state. This has been one of the things, and I will say I've been with ASBR for 4 months, and the SRFs is one that it's even being in it all the time is a lot to like wrap your head around. But basically, for the most part, what happens is the states put out a call for projects, essentially, for people to come and say, hey, this is what we need or whatnot, this is what we want to do. They use that to put together the project priority list, which helps do their intended use plans. Those intended use plans are what is submitted to EPA. I'd have to get back to you on the specifics of how, because like I said, it is different every state, and I'm trying to think if there's like a general how it goes back from that when they get the funds and it gets disseminated. I'd have to ask one of my SRF folks for sure on that one, but it does, you're right, it goes from the applicant to the state goes to EPA saying this is what we have, and then it goes back down.
And is it up to the states if they could make anything a grant, or is it like part of the law in receiving the money that they have to be loans?
Some of it is that, yeah, it's like, I think now I'm like, I have all like the language up because it's kind of gets a little confusing, but I'm pretty sure the 49% is what they have to do as grants or loans. I think that's I think that's how it's laid out. I would have to double check on that, but yeah, that's that 49% that's what you're supposed to be using as eligible grants or forgivable loans. I'm just trying to see if it's mandated that you have to use 49% or if they want you to, because you also have state set-asides that are also parts of the funding that comes down. That's little percentages based on every pot of money that the states can use for their own internal things like staffing and other things to get that off the ground. But the states don't necessarily have to use all those set-asides, and then sometimes if they don't use them, they'll use that for those grants and things to go back out to more projects. But that's state specific. I'm not sure exactly kind of like the figures on. I feel like most don't always use all their set-asides, but I can't be sure on that. But yeah, I'll have to get back to you and look on if it's mandated that 49% has to be grants and principal forgiveness.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. It looks like I don't see any more hands raised on our virtual people that attended. Thanks very much for joining us.
And just Mary, I'll send you a PDF of this so it can go out, and I'll take a look and see if I can follow up on those couple questions.
Okay. And anything else that you want to share with us? I'm sure we would appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, I was just gonna say, I guess two of the big things, since it is on the bill that we're tracking, is hopefully in the next couple months we will have guidance out from EPA on the lead service line inventories. Under the LCR, that's been the one part that they've been very adamant that they are going to focus on first. As we're actually just 3 weeks ago, put out a framework guidance that we put together to help systems essentially get their inventories together. So a lot of the states are working really hard on getting, we don't have a clear sense of the data that EPA is going to ask of the lead service lines. So far, what we've seen is kind of an aggregate of how many does a system have period of unknowns, how many period of lead, and then the galvanized, as you all know, the galvanized is sticky under the new LCR. But so a lot of the states are working really hard to get some inventory guidance and help out to the utilities. So that's been a big focus that we've been working on. And now I'm actually in the process right now of writing comments for EPA's federalism consultation on the federal MPDWR for PFOA and PFOS, which is obviously going to be addressed under the BIL. So it'll be very interesting to kind of see how those two regulations interplay with all these funding, because the PFOA and PFOS regulation, EPA is intending to propose it this fall, but it won't be finalized till next fall. And then typically they give 3 years to implement. So that puts us beyond the BIL funds. And same with the lead inventories are required to be completed by 2024, October 2024. And again, that kind of puts us out past all of this stuff, and we won't have the replacement if they're saying that they will propose the LCRI and get it finalized ahead of that deadline, ahead of that 2024 deadline. But that's still, I mean, we're already a few years into the BIL funds. So it's going to be really interesting to kind of see how that interplays together.
So do you have updates usually on your website about some of these processes?
Yeah, actually, I can send you that link as well. I definitely want to, because we actually just had a big symposium on lead inventories. So there's a lot of really good information that was put out for that specifically. But because, that's been one we've just been talking about a lot is, to use these funds, how is it going to go if we don't know where they are?
I see we have a question. Rita?
Hi, first I want to apologize right, the part that I wanted to hear about was the cybersecurity, and my boss came to the door.
Oh, no.
So if you've already said this, I apologize, but we're working to look for part of this, the IIJA that has to do with natural hazards and cybersecurity. You can use the I think it's 125 million for the entire pot over 5 years, but there has to be an appropriation. But we don't see anything written about it. I saw you said something about having EPA guidance, so I'm thinking that's going to help us figure that out. But then there was something about it might still be I don't know, competitive, like we have to be chosen for a project. Is that part of the picture too, or no?
That's actually a really good question, because that one I haven't actually dug into the actual like allocations themselves. I haven't really dug into that much, honestly, because I was kind of just waiting for the guidance to kind of dig into that. But that is actually one I do not know. And now I have to go back and look at even if the guidebook went into that. The guidebook on cybersecurity was not nearly as straightforward as some of the other parts. So and it was I had to go actually into the language of the BIL itself to kind of really tease that in. So I'd probably have to go back and look, but that's a very good question.
So when we were looking at it, or this is our experience, we looked at the bill guidance. It's not in there. And
okay, that's what I thought.
So we see people referencing it, and we hung on it right away, because it was like the first thing you went to was water under clean water, and it's right there. It's either natural disaster or natural hazard, cybersecurity resiliency for wastewater. And but since then, this was the first I realized that there was going to be EPA guidance. Is that guidance going to be comprehensive?
That's a good question, because no, it will be, so the guidance we're looking at is EPA specific. Now, I believe that's going to be water, because the big, it's we have transportation, we have all these other things. I believe the EPA one, though, should be comprehensive to the programs they're overseeing.
So however, this is one that the EPA is overseeing.
I think it's
in the IIJA. It says they're the authority over it.
Yeah, them and CISA. It's like the two. But with this one, I know there's been a really big focus in the SRFs. I have not heard specific talk on the cybersecurity aspects being included in this one, so I would hope so. But I actually haven't heard them say anything about the cybersecurity when they've been talking about this.
Okay. Fingers crossed, then.
Yeah.
Thank
you. Sorry. I know it's not cut black and white answers for you, and I apologize for that. It's a lot of unknowns still.
It just says that the allocation, so it does say the EPA. It doesn't say anything about CISA that I can see. Okay. But it says that it's like 125 million with 25 million each year. I might have that wrong, but it's over 5 years, and it starts in 2022. So, I was just like, okay, where is it? What do we do?
Yeah, and the 25. If you're reading it, then I'm sure that's right, but you're correct. I mean, all of it's supposed to start in 2022. We're still, there's a lot of unknowns right now. We're still going under a continuing resolution with the congressional budget. We don't have the omnibus bills yet. So there's a lot of just uncertainty and kind of nervousness, I think, a little bit about how this is going to roll out for 2022.
Well, thank you, because at least I'm not crazy.
You're not. You're not. This has been one, honestly, I'm really happy you all invited me, because this was a good exercise for me to really have to like break this down and explain, because it's not simple by any stretch. And it's one of those that I wish we had guidance when it came out. But I understand the agency. There was just, it was too hard to know what was going to be in the final bill, but hopefully this will be comprehensive enough guidance, and we won't have a ton of questions that come out of it.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So Stephanie, we've got one more question in-house here.
Sure.
Oh yeah, probably you already touched on this, probably the next step. And now that there's more funding available, have you seen that the cities and the states have been submitting more projects than they did before, or is it about the same?
I think that it's again state dependent. Some of them I think are already, but like I said before, there's a lot of knocking down the door already saying like, where are the funds at? But I don't believe most states have been seeing a whole lot of projects come through the door yet, because some of them haven't put out a big call for projects yet. And that's normally what happens. I believe that quite a few of the states are waiting for this guidance to figure out what they need from these applications to qualify under these. Like, we have the general, like I talked about, the general of what type of projects they are, but I know a couple states have moved forward and they've already put out calls for projects, but we're going to be on a tight deadline. So we're gonna have to get moved on it fast. But yeah, some of them I'm sure are already seeing an uptick. I know a couple states at least had already put out just kind of not calls for specific projects for the BIL for the funds as we know it, but they put out calls for just to try and get a sense of how much money they would need to address all the lead lines. That's been something that a few of the states have done. And already a couple of states have said that based on like their normal allocations, even if they got it all, there's not enough money to replace all of the lead lines. And that's been another communication issue because the White House has been pushing very much that, you know, we're going to get every lead line out because of these funds. And it's just looking like when you do the math that that's not, this is going to be an amazing step forward to get all these out, but it's still going to be a struggle to get it over those last few.
Okay, thank you. I guess we're done now, Stephanie. I look forward to your information. I'll pass it on to everyone that was at the meeting.
Perfect. Thank you so much, everyone. Thanks for having me talk, and I'll have a great rest of your day.
Okay, thank you.
Bye. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
So to the raffle really fast. We have two $50 gift cards and how much is it on? I know.